Clyde the Orangutan charmed millions in every which way but loose. Audiences loved watching him ride motorcycles and hug Clint Eastwood. But behind those adorable scenes was a heartbreaking truth. The real orangutan was torn from his mother's arms in Borneo at just 2 years old. Smugglers locked him in a crate for weeks during transport to America. What happened during his Hollywood training was even worse. Leaked documents reveal shocking methods used to make him obey. The smiling ape on screen was hiding years of trauma that would change animal protection laws forever. Clyde was born in 1974 in the wild rainforests of Borneo. He weighed just 4 pounds and spent his early months clinging to his mother's fur, learning to forage and move through the canopy. But that peace was shattered during a logging raid in East Kalimantan. Poachers, armed with blowpipes laced in tranquilizers, brought down his mother. Clyde was only 2 years old when he was ripped away from her arms. They shoved him into a small wooden crate, nailed it shut, and loaded it onto a cargo ship headed for the United States. The journey took over 2 weeks. There was no ventilation. Inside, it reached up to 40 degrees Celsius. Many young orangutans died from dehydration and malnutrition. Clyde barely made it. By the time he arrived in California in 1975, he was weak, undersized, and traumatized. A private zoo bought him for $500 and placed him alone in a 10 by 10 concrete cell. There were no trees, no grass, no sunrises, just concrete and wire. He was cut off from other orangutans and from the wild instincts he was born with. By age 3, Clyde began rocking back and forth for hours. Trainers called it cute. Experts called it trauma. Repetitive rocking was common in isolated primates, a sign of deep psychological damage. He was crate-trained to sit in a van for long stretches, 4 to 6 hours at a time, so he could be taken to Hollywood sets. On the outside, he appeared playful. He waved goodbye like a trained performer. But underneath, his diet lacked wild figs, insects, and leafy greens. The deficiency left his bones fragile and his immune system weak. It showed up in routine health checks but wasn't addressed. He smiled on cue and imitated humans because he had no choice. In April 1974, just before Clyde's arrival, another orangutan named Manis went through a 2-week audition at Gentle Jungle in California. He was 4 years old. They tested him under artificial lights, made him roll over and fetch balls. 5 to 7 takes a day, repeated over and over until he got it right. It wasn't just performance, it was survival. Manis passed. He landed cereal commercials. The bright lights and loud cues didn't scare him as much as the quiet did. At night, they locked him alone in a small, dark kennel. Trainers logged his whimpers. Orangutans aren't meant to be alone. Even though they live semi-solitary in the wild, young ones crave touch and soft sounds. Manis had neither. Jane Goodall would later write about cases just like his, where primates locked in isolation developed severe anxiety. The Gentle Jungle logs confirmed it. He whimpered most after long training days. By January 1975, Manis landed a cameo in a wildlife documentary. He worked 12-hour days with props made to look like jungle trees. The trainers fed him sugary snacks to keep him moving. In just 1 year, he ballooned from 60 to 80 pounds. The weight gain showed up in his records, but nothing changed. He often fell asleep right after scenes, his body worn out. To fill the social void, trainers gave him stuffed toys. At first, he hugged them. Then he started hiding food under them. PETA's archives from the 1980s confirmed this behavior. Food hoarding meant the animal wasn't sure when he'd eat next. In the wild, orangutans don't hoard. But Manis learned to stash candy under hay, behind corners, under blankets. Not because he was greedy, because he didn't trust his own schedule. Then came the break room clip. In late 1976, someone filmed Manus spinning in circles to music. For 10 minutes, he danced alone. The tape got passed around low-budget film sets. Agents watched it. They laughed. They saw potential. A few months later, Manus was cast as Clyde in a new film with Clint Eastwood. That moment of him spinning, lost in music, would become the defining quirk of Clyde on screen. But no one asked why he was spinning in the first place. In February 1977, Manus auditioned against 15 other orangutans for the lead in Every Which Way But Loose. The trainers ran a mock scene. Manus grabbed a prop beer bottle and pretended to drink it. That sealed it. He got the part. The producers signed a $10,000 contract for 6 months. For an animal actor, it was one of the biggest payouts of the time. They chose Manus because he was funny and smart, and because he could improvise without freezing under pressure. Training for the role lasted 8 weeks. They taught Manus 20 commands: hug, look scared, ride shotgun. Each one drilled 50 times a day. The most famous one? Clint Eastwood smeared peanut butter on his arm so Manus would lick him on cue. It worked. Manus licked and hugged Eastwood every time. They even wrote that trick into the script. Eastwood ended up carrying peanut butter jars during filming. But Manus didn't like long sessions. He lasted 3 minutes tops. After that, he'd throw props or refuse to move. So the trainers adjusted. They shortened the drills and handed out more treats. That's how he became one of the most rewarded animal actors in Hollywood. Noise was the next hurdle. Fight scenes needed crowd sounds, fireworks, shouting. So every day, for 30 minutes, they played noise at 90 decibels while Manus sat in the middle. At first, he covered his ears and whimpered. Training footage caught the flinches. They started at 60 decibels, increasing slowly. Over time, he stopped reacting. The production team called it progress. Animal behaviorists called it desensitization. He wasn't fine. He was numb. Then came the costumes. Manus had to wear a leather vest and jeans tailored to his 120-pound body. The leather was stiff and rubbed his skin raw. He scratched himself bloody during fittings. They switched to soft cotton liners. He still hated it. Eventually, he gave in. Not because it felt good, because it stopped being new. Off camera, Eastwood and Manus spent long hours in vans between shoots. That's where the high five started. Manus copied Eastwood's gestures, so Clint leaned into it. Treats and praise came every time the hand met his. The high five became their private joke. Then a scripted moment. It showed up in the final scene. One take, no repeats. Manus knew what it meant. By 1978, Clyde wasn't just a character. He was a brand. But behind the success was a trail of isolation, forced diets, noise drills, scratchy costumes, and stolen instincts. Clyde waved. He danced. He hugged. But no one saw the years of crates, the darkness of the kennels, the aching joints, or the missing trees. In May 1978, they brought Manus the orangutan onto a noisy bar set in Bakersfield, California. His first real movie scene was a chaotic bar brawl, and it took 15 takes across 4 hours just to get it right. Every single move had to be rehearsed so that no one got hurt. Manus wore padded gloves, and instead of real punches, he gave soft nudges to the actors, followed instantly by treats. That reward system kept him focused, even as shouting, lights, and breakaway furniture surrounded him. Nobody had ever asked a primate to do something this carefully choreographed on camera before. Clint Eastwood stood nearby, watching him repeat the same action over and over without flinching. It wasn't just a bar fight. It was the moment Hollywood realized animals could handle serious action if given the right training and patience. Then came the long rides. For the motorcycle chase scenes along Highway 99, Manus sat in a sidecar while the crew filmed at 40 miles per hour, engines screaming and diesel fumes thick in the heat. The sun beat down with 95-degree heat, no shade in sight. Every 45 minutes, filming had to stop so Manas could drink water and cool off. But the breaks didn't always come fast enough. He showed signs of heat stress more than once. Still, he never once tried to jump out or misbehave. He just waited for the next cue. That kind of patience was rare, especially for a wild animal being thrown into camera setups and speeding vehicles. On one day alone, they shot for 6 straight hours. All of it made it into the final cut, and the chase became one of the most memorable parts of the movie. The most emotional scene came when Manas had to say goodbye. The script had Clint Eastwood at a zoo, where Clyde the Orangutan hugs him tightly one last time. That hug wasn't just acting. Trainers had deliberately separated Manas in a crate just before filming to heighten his longing. By the time the cameras rolled, he ran straight for Clint's leg and clung tight. They did the take 12 times, and every time, Manas held on as if he was truly being left behind. Photographs later showed damp fur under his arms, a sign of stress sweat. It was powerful, almost too real. Animal psychologists later pointed to that scene as one of the rare moments when an animal's emotional state truly mirrored what it was portraying on screen. The pressure didn't let up after dark. For the card game scene, night shoots went all the way to 2 a.m. Manas had to deal clumsy hands of cards and look convincingly awkward, which sounds easy until it took 25 takes to get that balance of charm and fumble. To keep him awake, the crew slipped caffeine into his fruit, just enough to keep him moving, not enough to harm him. But the effect lingered. For days after, he couldn't sleep well. He paced, rubbed his eyes, refused naps. Trainers had never needed an animal to perform through the night like this before. But Manas did it. On camera, he looked goofy and sweet. Behind the scenes, he was exhausted and out of rhythm. The film wrapped in August 1978, and while the cast celebrated with drinks and speeches, Manas was given a banana cake and quietly loaded into a crate. He didn't get to stay for the party. The moment the last shot wrapped, he was sent back to Gentle Jungle, his sanctuary. But the silence hit hard. For 48 hours, he paced non-stop, refusing to eat or rest. The energy of the set was gone. No lights, no faces, no treats. Just quiet. And he didn't know why. After the movie hit theaters in November 1978, Clyde the Orangutan became a star. Over 500,000 pieces of Clyde merchandise were sold in 6 months. T-shirts, mugs, plush toys. He was everywhere. And Hollywood noticed. By mid-1979, Manas was booked for live shows in Las Vegas, 10 gigs across different hotel stages. Every night, 3 mini performances. He even had a bit where he mimicked beer drinking, which fans loved. But that meant sometimes working 2 shifts in one day. The lights, the noise, the applause. It all came fast. He was the main act, and the crowds couldn't get enough. His stay at the Flamingo Hotel was the busiest. 6 nights a week, 8 weeks straight. That meant strobe lights flashing, music blaring, stagehands rushing around. Manas started squinting, reacting poorly to the chaos. Vets were brought in to monitor him backstage. But the shows continued. Celebrities like Frank Sinatra came by and pet him backstage. Kenny Rogers signed autographs for his handlers. But under the fun, there was fatigue. Manas stopped eating regularly. He didn't rest between shows. His charm stayed, but his energy slipped. Then came the promotional tour. In 1979, Manas visited 15 U.S. cities. Malls, studios, TV sets. He posed for nearly 50 photos a day. For transport, he was carried in a backpack harness. Over time, the weight bruised his shoulders. He didn't complain. He got his honey treats and smiled for the fans. Half a kilo of honey per day, just to keep him going. But he still had to travel constantly, perform without rest. He couldn't even enjoy gifts from fans because the wrong fruit could upset his digestion. Over 750 appearances. and everyone drained him just a little more. In 1980, Manas got cast in a Coca-Cola commercial that spoofed his movie role. Shot in Atlanta over 5 days, it featured him riding a bike prop again and again. 30 takes to nail it. But the southern humidity clung to his fur, which had to be brushed and conditioned every night. That extra grooming meant longer hours. The heat made him irritable. He kept swatting at handlers and tugging at his matted coat. Temperatures hit 88 degrees, humidity over 70%. The ad turned out great, and fans loved it, but nobody saw how drained he looked between takes. Off-camera, Manas lived at Gentle Jungle in Florida, where he had tire swings and puzzles to keep him busy. But years of tours and cameras had changed him. He grew more aggressive. At feeding time, he swatted arms and growled low. Over 20 incidents were recorded by 1981, enough to concern the staff. The aggression wasn't random. It was the result of constant travel, overstimulation, and lack of rest. Even with more enrichment and limited visitors, he was still the same orangutan who once hugged Clint Eastwood. Only now, the lights were off and the crowd was gone. By 1980, Manas had grown to 150 pounds, twice the size of the younger orangutans used in films. The sequel, Any Which Way You Can, required intense fight scenes, and Manas couldn't safely handle the weight of the choreography. Test rehearsals in January 1980 proved he was too strong, too big for the role. The trainers made a call. New orangutans, lighter and more agile, were brought in. Manas was cut from the lead. He stayed on for promotional shoots and smaller gigs, but his movie days were over. For 3 weeks, he banged the walls of his enclosure, a sound of protest that echoed through the sanctuary. They brought him back anyway for continuity shots. During pre-production in early 1980, he was asked to film a few hugging scenes with the younger apes playing Clyde. He did 5 hugs, but by the 10th take, he resisted. Notes from his main trainer described him as distant, unfocused. The young replacements unsettled him. To keep him still, they used diluted mace spray, a method meant to startle without pain, but controversial even then. It worked, but at a cost. Manas's spirit was clearly shaken. His Vegas shows didn't stop. The routine was changed. Now he danced to the new movie's soundtrack. Sets lasted 20 minutes. The lights were just as bright, but the crowd had changed. People heckled. They said he looked slower, older. He didn't respond, but afterward, he refused to eat for 24 hours, twice a month, every month. The crew tracked it. They adjusted the music, shortened the acts, but the spark that once made him special was fading. In 1981, Clint Eastwood reunited with Manas for a 10-minute TV special. The orangutan had to rehearse 40 cues over 2 days. The director got frustrated when Manas missed his marks. Trainers withheld treats to make him obey. It worked, but animal welfare advocates criticized the method. This appearance marked the end of Manas's screen life. By the end of 1981, Manas was officially retired. Gentle Jungle became his home full-time. They gave him puzzle feeders to keep his mind sharp, but every few weeks, a call would come in. A photo shoot, a charity event, a hotel lobby. He'd be crated again. Driven for hours. Waited in holding areas for up to 12 hours before the show even began. He wasn't just retired, he was in limbo. Between 1979 and 1982, he only got 1 vet check a year. Nobody noticed the gum infections at first. Years of sweet treats had rotted his teeth. They gave him human antibiotics, which made him vomit for days. The infections lingered. His handlers called it normal. But the pain was real. His immune system weakened, and no one truly understood how to treat it properly. The Los Angeles Times later revealed just how unprepared the industry was to handle his care. In Vegas, the tools used to keep him in line got darker. Trainers fitted him with correction collars. Every time he stepped off stage or missed a cue, A jolt went through his neck. Not enough to injure, but enough to leave red marks. Photos from that era show the spots clearly. Jane Goodall herself documented how often primates like Manus were trained this way. The public never knew, but backstage, it was routine. And then, in 1980, during a Texas meet and greet, it happened. Manus was left in the sun, 100 degrees, no shade, for 3 hours. He collapsed from heat stroke. Ice packs revived him, but he didn't move for hours. Publicists hid the story. Fan mail flooded in, but no one mentioned what really happened. They told the world he was resting. They didn't say he nearly died. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was part of a pattern that defined his later years. Overworked, underprotected, and always smiling when the cameras rolled. In 1981, the orangutan named Manus stood frozen in a rehearsal tent, confused and silent. He had just refused to do a simple trick. The trainer, frustrated, didn't shout or stomp his feet. Instead, he pulled out a can of mace and sprayed it directly into Manus's eyes. The pain hit instantly. Manus screamed blindly for half an hour. He couldn't see, couldn't move, couldn't escape. His eyes burned while handlers stood nearby, unsure what to do. When they finally dragged him outside, they hosed him down in a freezing outdoor trough. He shivered uncontrollably, his body curling in on itself. Jane Goodall wrote about this moment in her book, Visions of Caliban, on page 175. A 2008 article in the Los Angeles Times referenced it too. The reason for the attack was simple. The trainer wanted obedience, not cooperation, not trust, just control. And in that part of the industry, control often came through pain. The very next year, in 1982, Manus missed a cue during a rehearsal. It wasn't much. He delayed a hug scene by a few seconds. But the trainer didn't see hesitation. He saw laziness. And for that, Manus was punished. 10 times, he was struck across the back with an iron pipe wrapped in newspaper. It left large bruises that swelled for days. The newspaper served only one purpose: to silence the sound, to make sure no one heard. But the marks on his body told the real story. The trainer later admitted to doing this almost every week, not just for major problems, but for anything: a pause, a look, a flinch. PETA's confidential records would later describe this pattern in detail. The beatings were routine. They weren't rare, they were just quiet. When Manus wasn't being hit, he was being hidden. In the 1980s, when he showed signs of fear or nervousness, he'd be locked inside a crate. No windows, no light, no room to stretch. For 2 days at a time, he sat in darkness. The crate was sometimes placed outside in the cold. The idea was to isolate him until he broke. It worked. He began banging his head against the metal bars, over and over. The scar stayed with him for life. You can see it in some of the old photos, right above his left eye. The Los Angeles Times confirmed it in 2008. IMDb's biography of Manus mentioned it too. The scar was real, and it came from silence. In 1983, producers wanted Manus to look cute. That meant chubby. So his diet was changed. He was force-fed high-fat meals every day. His liver started to fail. When trainers noticed, they didn't stop the diet. They gave him strong laxatives instead. For 1 week straight, he suffered from diarrhea. It left him dehydrated and weak. He could barely walk, yet he was still expected to perform. The Center for Great Apes recorded this. So did a fan forum dedicated to Clint Eastwood. The reason for the forced weight wasn't health, it was marketing. They wanted Manus to look like a stuffed toy on screen. But off camera, he was a ghost of himself. When Manus reached sexual maturity, he began showing normal behavior. He masturbated. It's natural for a young male orangutan, but the trainers didn't care. They sprayed him with water. At first, it was short bursts. Then came the full hose downs. 5 minutes straight. Freezing water. The goal was humiliation. Suppress his instincts. Break the animal. The Los Angeles Times and PETA documentaries both revealed this. These weren't one-time punishments. They were repeated, again and again. Over the years, they became part of his training. But Manis wasn't the only one. In 1980, a young orangutan named Buddha was brought in to replace Manis for the sequel, Any Which Way You Can. One day in July, he stole donuts on set. Trainers found out. They dragged him back to the facility and beat him. For 20 straight minutes, a 3.5-foot axe handle was used, mostly on his head. Crew members watched it happen. Some walked away. Some quit. Buddha began seizing on the floor. Blood stained the handle and the ground. He died 3 months later. The autopsy found cerebral hemorrhaging and skull fractures. Jane Goodall wrote about it in Visions of Caliban, page 180. There were photos. They were leaked, but no one was punished. Then came CJ, another orangutan used in the same sequel. In August 1980, he was sprayed in the face with mace 3 separate times. His eyelids blistered. The wounds were raw, but instead of rest, he was given makeup to cover it. The chemicals reacted badly. His face became inflamed. In pain, he began chewing on his own fingers. By 1981, he was sent to Gentle Jungle, a so-called retirement facility. But his trauma followed him. Bandages were changed daily for 6 months. He refused to interact with others. He was broken in a way that couldn't be reversed. Despite all of this, despite the bruises, the scars, the seizures, the deaths, not a single charge was filed. The trainers kept working. The producers kept filming. In the early 1980s, there were no laws to protect animals used in training. The American Humane Association only monitored what happened during filming, not before or after. So as long as the cameras were rolling and no violence was caught on tape, there were no consequences. Gentle Jungle, the same place that took in CJ, was fined $5,000 in 1982. But not for Buddha's death, not for CJ's injuries. It was for something else entirely. They stayed in business. The abuse stayed in the shadows. Manis died in 1985. He was only 28. Great apes can live up to 50 years in the wild. But Manis died from untreated infections. His body had been weakened by years of trauma, both physical and emotional. Jane Goodall wrote about it on page 190 of Visions of Caliban. That same year, activists began pushing for reform. In 1986, the Animal Welfare Act was amended. It banned the use of great apes in film unless strict oversight was in place. Manis's death had become a turning point. He didn't die for nothing. The backlash continued into the 1990s. PETA launched a campaign focused on Clyde, the orangutan character. It exposed beatings, deprivation, fear. One case stuck in the public mind. An orangutan beaten for stealing food, dying from brain injuries. By 1999, Hollywood finally responded. Disney's Tarzan didn't use a single real ape. It relied entirely on CGI. Costs dropped too, from $2 million per CGI ape in the early days down to $800,000 in 5 years. Live animals were no longer cheaper, and audiences preferred the digital ones. Clyde's tragedy had changed the industry from the inside out. Clint Eastwood eventually spoke out. In a 2008 interview, he called the orangutan abuse a dark chapter. He said he didn't know how bad it was at the time, but he felt uneasy on set. In 2010, his foundation donated $1 million to primate sanctuaries. Places like the Center for Great Apes and Save the Orangutans used that money to give former performers a second chance. They built bigger enclosures, hired more staff, made room for healing. Eastwood's regret became action, quiet but powerful. By 2015, rehabilitation had become real. Sanctuaries were no longer cages. They were forests. One LA Times article from that year showed how orangutans rescued from the entertainment industry were recovering. 50-acre enclosures, real trees, real sun. Over 70% learned to build nests again. They taught their children, learned to live in groups. It wasn't perfect, but it was peace. Apes once locked in trailers were now swinging through trees. Their pasts hadn't vanished, but they weren't trapped by them anymore.